going. So first and foremost, we are going to make a statement here. This is the new normal. So this is the new normal. We're going to get people out of the box. We're going to get our training managers, all those in charge of training, out of the box, and just make sure that we're transforming the way we do things, the way we work together, the way we train together, whether this be in a veterinary school, in a veterinary clinic, in a laboratory. And this is a way for us of being absolutely sure that we are all working together. So how can we work together? How can we surf on all of this? How can we advance together in terms of work, but not only? And how can we be sure that all of the solutions we set up during the crisis be fully curable? So let's get in the time machine. Let's take a look at how things were done before the crisis. So, of course, all of you have your own input to give us on this. But Greg, for example, what were the working methods that were set up at Wolf before the health crisis? Well, we've been working in distance working for a very long time, home working, because we've looked for specific types of people. So we were not particularly impacted by all of this period. We actually brought in 2 new people during the crisis, and that meant that we were working actually in a, not in a classroom system, but in a distance learning system. So these 2 new employees were brought in this way, and we have had some meetings recently this week in a distant situation. But it's good for us as well to come together every now and again. So in terms of distance working, it wasn't a problem for us. But what we did see is that before the crisis, we know that the animal health sector, and this is not negative, was running a little bit late in terms of digital learning regarding other sectors, such as the health sector as a whole. So over the last 12 months, we've seen things emerging, things that we've brought on board ourselves and from elsewhere. And all of this meant that we were able to accelerate the digitalization process by implementing our teams and all those involved. So what I can say is that it was a very positive way of moving forward. And this is something that we talked about before, of course, the lockdown. Pascal, you work in a clinic, an ever-growing clinic. You've got quite a large number of practitioners. How was training organized in the clinic before the health crisis? Well, for us, it's very, very different because everything we did was done in a classroom situation, be it for our practitioners, our own training courses, generally always in a classroom. And digitalization was really very, very, very limited. It was always more of a bit of a gadget or anything else. So that was the situation before the health crisis. Sébastien, you worked in a large veterinary school, 800 students per year trained. So what was the situation pre-health crisis? Well, pre-health crisis, most of our training was done in a classroom situation, although we were using a digital platform as well, an LMS platform. We have been since 2017. So only a few kind of pioneer professors, that were very, very updated on the synchronous and asynchronous systems. We had a pre-lockdown system because there was a strike, transport strike, and so people couldn't actually come to us, and they had to learn in a distance situation, and that helped us get ready for all of this. So MST, David, who does a lot of internal training for your staff, and you also accompany your vets, your partner vets. What was the answer to training before the crisis? Well, we already had a combination of classroom and distance learning before. And we were also used to distance working as well. A lot of people all those that wanted to actually work from home. So And this is because we have an American group behind us with all sorts of rules, and e-learning was very much a reality before. So we have a sales team as well with a lot of different persons involved, and we really did have this digitalization approach, this heavy-duty digitalization approach, which was underway in all areas, meetings, training, etc. So that definitely helped us to get on board pretty quickly. Regarding the L&D, we did a few Facebook Live courses, but most of our training was prior to the lockdown, was classroom-based. So it means that the health crisis in March actually really kicked to the anthill and got everything moving in this respect, didn't it? And we can say that although digitalization was already anticipated before March, it definitely got you all going. And this sudden stop lockdown situation for all those in the training sector. And we talk about, of course, the learner who finds themselves alone behind their computer, but also the trainer who didn't have their training tools anymore, and the strategic management as well. I mean, everybody had to get on board. David, how did this happen for you? How did you absorb the shock? Well, once we got beyond the initial shock, as it were, because it was a shock, we began to launch a number of initiatives for digitalization and distance learning. We had a challenge, which was that of continuing to train our customers and our sales team, so we kept our team up and running. And we sought to make sure that absolutely everybody would be able to use our connected tools, our distance tools. So that was very important for us. And for the training in time, all of the seminars shifted into digital format. Our product launches became WebEx meetings as well with distance learning tools. So all of this took us about a week, 2 weeks to get everything up and running. We created a number of tutorials as well, practice tutorials. And all of this really was set up in quite a natural way. We had our constraints, we had our objectives, there were no major objections. And, everything began relatively happily and healthily. We had to bring in a few constraints that we came up against, which you might talk about later, but we moved into 100% digital, even for the onboarding for bringing in new recruits. We continued to bring in new recruits during the lockdown, and all of this was very much a distant process with integration programs, training programs, which were pre-established but had to be adapted to the situation. So it all happened quite quickly, of course, but in a relatively calm and harmonious way. It's interesting to see how this kind of shockwave was absorbed. Just a little reminder for all of those listening, we have a context with a chat box. So just let us know how things worked for you, how everything was functioning for you.
Alimenter les débats.
And really feed into the debate, give us your input as far as you can. So Sébastien Perrot, working at Enva, can you tell us how things worked for you and how this shockwave actually hit you and probably didn't leave you too many alternatives? Could you give us a few examples of real-life situations that you or your colleagues experienced? Well, you know what? Sometimes we're quite used to this. Our amphitheaters are sometimes quite empty, but in less than 24 hours, we had to just turn it all round and get the training sorted out for our students. So we decided to base our work on our resource staff, trainers and so on. And we actually set up a number of TIPOs for our colleagues. We had a hotline, and in less than 24 hours, we managed to get this continuum up and running for all of our trainers, for all of our professors. Everybody started to do this. And we, the biggest difficulty for us was in our clinical processes. It was very difficult to do this in distance learning, but our colleagues were very ingenious. They organized all kinds of virtual clinics, and we used a lot of interactive tools in order to bring on board our students. And we were very surprised by the return from our students. That was very interesting for us. And almost all of our students were connected. And those that weren't connected, it's that they had issues with their network and so on. So it was a fantastic process for all of us. Pascal, we know that the veterinary process was slowed down somewhat. What about the training process for you? How did you live the move, the shift to something very, very new, something that you'd never experienced before in terms of training? Well, it was a bit stressful, I have to say, as for everybody. And what was interesting was that everything that we had, of course, in classroom learning before, had to be shifted and changed. So we had prepared many conferences, and this was a lot of time. And to be perfectly honest, what we found was that we had a lot more time on our hands. And it was a very, very clear lesson learned on time saving. It was much quicker for us to do this. In fact, we stopped a certain number of training courses and changed them into other systems. So we're getting a lot of questions coming in here. And there's a question particularly Matthew in the technical section. We have a question from Nicholas saying in the world before, this was a way of creating dynamics, momentum in the team. How did you manage to create momentum, team momentum, with digital tools? How did you manage to do the same thing as you would do in a classroom-based training? Yeah, I can give you some feedback on that. Well, that's a very good question. We always think that the digital process will take the human out of training, but to be perfectly honest, I think that in this intergenerational world and the generational differences, personally, you probably spent a lot of time with your grandparents in the past, and you can see that things work differently today. And all these ideas of saying that digital tools are only for young people, I think we need to get rid of that completely. I think that is not the right way of looking at this. And in the digital world, there's many, many different tools. There's what we call social learning, tools which are not very deployed really in the environment. We have forums, we have monitoring. Sébastien probably has quite a lot of experience in the veterinary school, but this also means that the trainer has to change posture. When we talk about digital learning, it's great to have fantastic content and virtual content and so on, but the accompaniment process of our learners, group animation and so on, is just as important as the rest. Just a bit of a personal testimonial. Guylaine will back me on this. I'm very, very content-based. I like content, and it's my thing. And we had a lot of discussions in the agency as to how we could accompany our learners with monitoring and online tutorials and social chat boxes and social media related tools and so on. And I really do believe that this is just as important as the content itself. Sébastien, do you have anything you'd like to add on this, on the monitoring aspect in your veterinary school? Yes, in terms of group learning, one of the things that really helped us is that all of this was already integrated into the school because we'd had one semester that had gone relatively well. So people had met already, they had group sessions, they knew each other, and that was really, really important for bringing these young people into their training courses. We had forums, we had chat systems, we had people working with their professors directly, and we also had a tutorial system, and the professors were responsible for given students. So that helped us to really reinforce the link to students. We got in touch with the students, we found out their difficulties, and created a real one-to-one relationship with them. And one of the things that was very difficult, the isolation of the professor. They're sitting there in front of their computer with a camera. They don't know really who's there because very often students don't turn their cameras on. So they don't get the feedback from their training. But that means we set up a lot of activities like little quizzes with youth tag or pollen in order to have the feedback from the students to be sure that there was somebody at the end of the line. So that was something that was really useful. And the group work was done in more, I would say, a synchronous way than an asynchronous. This is a real challenge, I think, that all of us had to create these informal or formal team moments. We had WhatsApp groups, we had connected times together, be it personal or other. And of course, this was important for us, although there was a lot of benefits in terms of concentration, in terms of starting and finishing on time, the meetings. That was very, very important. And in terms of concentration as well, and I think that all of us really felt that they'd worked more, longer, and harder to a certain extent because we were more concentrated on what was going on. And one of the challenges for us in the field was to remobilize everybody in an activity where the human relationship, the human side was vital. We'd lost a little bit of a link, but we created a bit of an artificial link. And, it needed to come to an end at some point, but we certainly did our best. A lot of advantages, gave us the opportunity to test out many different tools, but in terms of team cohesion, of course, this is an important point. Pascal, you were working in a classroom the way, and again, when we talk about the management of all of this, we can see people reacting on the chat box. People were less available, of course. So how did things work for you in human terms in the clinic, in a classroom-based way? It was okay. I mean, we had some rather strange, of course, rules because we couldn't come anywhere near each other. But what was probably the most difficult thing was to create a link with those who weren't there. And the web tools for this were important. But we managed to get around this problem. It was quite difficult for us to do this because those who were present were exhausted, of course, and didn't necessarily want to share with those that were not present. So when we take a look at this as a whole, we can see there's a bit of a gap between the classroom and the distance learning. And in the longer term, and this brings me back to training, the trainer is trained, and training the trainer, of course, this requires a certain amount of support from our team. So that's very important too. And when we take a look at all of this, we need a continuum of service. We need this pedagogical approach. What has where has the change been in terms of the relationship with the students? What is really truly going to be different tomorrow? Well, we did a little kind of inquiry on our students, kind of questionnaire, and many people said what they particularly appreciated was having the replays available. It means that they were more concentrated, that they didn't have to take notes, that if they cut off at some point, they could come back to the video, they could run back over some specific points, and that was particularly important. So again, when we talk about all of this, this was particularly important for us. And this idea of being present and being able to really contact and touch people involved was important. So we've also started to work on the notion of inverse classroom. That will be for the future, and that's something that's going to become generalized. Technology is not that difficult to use. People are seeing this, they're understanding this. They can do things relatively easily, relatively quickly, although it was necessary to adapt oneself and adapt the training methods. It's a way of really adding momentum, of creating more dynamic. If I can just add to this,
eu un choc les 15 premiers jours. Et nous, on l'a vu le choc.
What we can say is that we had a bit of a shock during the first 2 weeks. It really was. It was almost a shock wave. The training was most definitely not the priority of our customers at this point in time, be it in the logistics chains or elsewhere. They were fighting to keep their jobs and fighting against a health crisis. So a couple of weeks were difficult. But we're in an industry which was running a little bit late, and this really made people really overcome the digital barrier. So that was important. And again, this is something we can talk about. We have undergone a few inquiries with our customers, and this has been particularly important for us. A quarter of the people that we questioned in the questionnaire said they thought we'd done things properly. So basically, it shows that things are possible, and things were done in a reactive way. And this is, I think, the way that we're going to have to work in the future. We need to sit down, we need to choose the solutions, we need to think of a long-term development process. It's really, change management, if you like. And when we're working in change management, we need to create the conditions for the future. So, I think we've all understood that we have to do this, but we've also understood that we need to move forward, and that this is the only way to work serenely in the future. Yeah, I just wanted to make a point about this. I think it's got everybody on board the digital train, whoever it is. Our teams, our customers who are a little bit slow on the uptake. When we look at webinars, we've got a lot more people than we would do in a physical meeting, which is extremely clear. Pascal? Now, I wanted to come back to the fact that during this period, we had a myriad of proposals on internet in all different areas. And this is also a way of really being sure that we're organizing training, that we are defining the means for this. And for us, this was a way of transforming, of totally creating a much more structured system, particularly in the blended This is really interesting. Let me just come back to Mathieu, who's got some very interesting questions there on the relationship between the trainer and the trainee. Yes, indeed. We've got two types of questions, which are not linked, of course, but one question which is about distance learning trainer training, because this, again, is something that we don't necessarily have the means to do for this distance training method. And we also have a question which is more relative to the human element, the notion of resilience, this way of preparing people to act, react, and interact in an emergency situation. And another person, Martin, is asking about the right to deconnect. And we know that with home working, people often have a concern with this. That, we never turn off. Guylaine? Well, I think that the question of the trainer training is a very real challenge. Once again, I'm going to sound like a bit of an oldie here, but in our sector, training is completely taken over by the technical aspect. So our sensitivity to training, to teaching is a little, sometimes a little bit lacking, if you like. Sorry, Pascal, but and others, but that's not the center or the heart of what we do. And when we talk about digital learning and the development of digital learning in training, the training world, we have to admit it. A lot of people see this as a bit of a threat because people feel that they're losing their potential and their possibilities. And we need two different types of skills. We're moving from the role of knowledge, the person who has the knowledge, to a facilitator, the role of facilitator. And there's a whole range of different training organizations. all sorts of online training methods. Once again, another approach, and this is perhaps a more sophisticated approach, and this is something that we're managing to do at the moment. We see this in veterinary schools or organizations like labs and things like that. These are pluridisciplinary, multidisciplinary teams with experts. And Sébastien, I know that your pedagogical engineering team did a massive amount of work in the veterinary schools. We have customers in labs. In the training teams, there is a pedagogical engineer, a project leader, and then the historical team, if you like, made up of veterinarians and more technical persons. So the idea is that we all increase in terms of skills. That's what we need to do. So in terms of the profession as a whole, that's what we're doing, we're working on. And these are things which already existed. And I would say that the wave of the lockdown is that we've all got a kick up the backside, and we've had to move on. We've had to move further. Yeah, on the question of the right to deconnect. So I work in a company, and it's a very real issue. Very real issue. You know, the right to well-being at work, in the workplace. And I think maybe all of us really worked harder during the lockdown than in a normal situation. And the extra training courses that came and that sort of added on top of all of this had to be taken on board as well. So we were doing a lot of extra overtime also at this time. So this is something very different to what we do with the vets. We go and work with vets when they're free, of course. And this was a completely different approach. This internal training course is part of the daily work. And this notion of not being able to deconnect at any time is a very real issue. I'd just like to say for us too, same thing, in terms of the work that we do. And when we talk about distance learning training, the sessions are very short, so that we have pause periods, which are a little bit longer, and we've abandoned the web training process. We have a question coming in on the chat from Ludivine de Moussel. How can we keep the motivation of our audiences in distance learning? How do we keep people motivated and on the ball? Okay, well, I think we have to. That comes back to a question from Grégory Santaner. How can we use these tools in order to keep people's interest during conferences? Yeah, all of us have tried to be as creative as we possibly can be during the confinement. Of course, we're not all equal in terms of facilitation and animation. Some people are better than others. And, you know, we need several different speakers. It mustn't last too long, an hour max probably. We have to spread the facilitators around. And then there are tools, of course. We have some very individual tools like Klaxon, where we can do questionnaires, ask questions, do mini quizzes, and so on. A lot of new techniques available to us, and a lot of fun, a lot of happiness, a lot of smiles and laughs. You know, that's simple. I completely agree with that.
Utilise effectivement des petits logiciels de quiz en mettant un mode
interactive quiz systems with challenges, competitions. Regularly, we take a look at the scores. We can see which student is doing the best, and that works really well. That kind of competitive notion. We also have videos. This means that we can have a little break every now and again. And sometimes there are little, the kid that walks behind you, the dog that jumps up behind you, the cat that leaps on your head, that sort of thing. So it's almost that kind of, really almost the handicraft approach that keeps everybody on the ball. I just want to make a point as well on this. We always come back to the same thing, and Pascal said this too. What is the learner expecting, and what can we do in this respect? And then the solutions that we find are there to help us with this. There's loads and loads of solutions. masses, maybe even too many solutions, maybe 500 suppliers all doing the same thing at the moment in the world. So I think that what we need to do is to sit down and really truly think about what we do, get a bit of a 360-degree angle on this. And in the university context, that's an important point. When we look at the Google e-learning management system, how can all of these interactive systems, be they virtual, webinars, and so on, how can they be compiled, aggregated for the learner in order to go even further in the individualized learning approach? And we need to sit down with a bit of hindsight and look at all of this. We saw this in the introduction. This is something which is being reinforced more and more. Everybody, all those involved in training have found solutions, new solutions. What are the solutions that you are using at the moment? What are the solutions that worked well, and what are the solutions that you have rejected that don't work so well? David, do you have an approach to this, to the digital learning at MST? It was really, and this is something that's going to be intensified, really a proof of concept type of approach. This is something that we started working on internally, and we felt that we had progress to make on this, and this was accelerated. The different channels are important, of course, but of course we will have distance learning, of course we will have multi-channel learning, and of course we will have blended learning with different approaches, short learning courses, micro-learning courses. There's so many things we can do. There's so much we can explore. And one of the things that really we've learned, and that we're really doing better, is to take this on board and really improve it. As elsewhere, we have a range of different approaches, and this has allowed us to explore different ways of doing what we do and do this into the future. So we're going to intensify the digital process, and we're going to be blending more and more. Everybody knows how to do e-learning today. We know how it works. And to come back to the question before, we will make sure that our trainers are trained in order to optimize the message, and that the message will be clear for a learner. So if I was to really retain something in terms of impact, it's intensification of what we've already started. Sébastien, do you consider going back in time? We're seeing that everybody's adopting good and bad methods now that the lockdown is over. Do you think that we're going to go back to doing things in the way of the good old days, or do you think we're going to change things in the future? I think we're going to change things in the future. We have some guidelines, ministerial guidelines, which can strain us in terms of the space given to our students. So our capacities are somewhat limited. We've got 2 months to get ready for the new academic year. We shifted to 100% digital in a very quick period. Errors, there was that number of glitches that had to be sorted out, but we're really going to rethink the way we teach in order to have this inversed classroom situation, to optimize everything. And this for our clinics, for our practical sessions as well, we will come back to classroom. Another point is when our students go out to visit an abattoir or a breeding farm, we don't have any solution at the moment, because this means that we require transport systems. The farmers don't want to receive too many people in their farm, etc., etc. So we're going to actually be taking a look at digital tools as well for these visits and these practical courses. We're not there yet. We still need to move forward on all of this. We're not in a routine situation where our boat is just going to move forward calmly and quietly. We still have some work. I have a question on the chat, which is a question for students who have difficulty accessing technology. Do you see that there is a certain amount of inequality in terms of access to digital tools? You have some students who maybe don't have the same possibilities as others. Not in terms of computers, because all of our students have computers, and that is important. And once again, we have a lot of people who have really been working in this field. And we have people who, students who are communicating with WhatsApp or with their cell phones. And the fact of having replays, people in restaurants with Wi-Fi and so on, it means that people were not in a classroom situation. They were not synchronous. They were asynchronous. And that was also very useful. The modalities that we used for those students who couldn't connect, the professor actually called the student. They gave an oral test in order to validate it. We overcame those hurdles and obstacles in this way. And generally speaking, our veterinary students are relatively favored in this respect in terms of digital. When we talk about the new world training, we're talking about new models as well for training. We're talking performance as well. We know there's a lot of questions on this in the chat. How can we measure the process tomorrow? How can we measure the budgets for training? Is it growing? Is it declining? I'd like to hand over now to Pascal. Pascal, who has invested in online training, and who about how we can manage all of this. I know that you worked particularly in LMS. What are your criteria to really assess the return on investment of these different approaches? Well, LMS is a definite tool. These learning management systems is a definite way of really measuring return on investment of those trained, for those trained. But it's probably the only tool available for this. We were talking too about training budgets. This is something that we're not used to managing. It's something that we used to do in a quite random way, and we'd just do this in a random manner. But now that we know that our Congress budgets are going to be reduced, it means that we can invest more time, energy, and resources in learning management systems, in LMS. So there is definitely going to be a shift to this kind of format. And it means that we will have a better follow-up of training on a day-to-day basis, which is something we definitely didn't have before. Grégory, do you have any points to make on the performance measurement in training? I'm not going to be too negative about this, but culturally, we don't have this performance measurement culture for training. I think for those that know, live in England, and in England there is a very real, there are scorecards for training, indicators, and so on. In France, as Pascal was saying, we're managing our training budgets with our training collection organizations, and that's it pretty much. So we're not yet really, we haven't yet really taken on board the performance element, but we're seeing it more and more. I think we were on a relatively, in a relatively positive momentum before the lockdown, and the health crisis will accelerate this. And I think it's very important to undertake a business-based performance assessment. And this notion of return on investment training is feasible, perfectly feasible.
Une étude en double aveugle randomisée, c'est un peu tendance en ce moment.
The idea is not to do a double blind test or anything like that, but it's to get the trend, you know. We did it in this way, my previous employer, to correlate the effort of training with the impact on business growth, on growth as a whole, on turnover, and see if there was or not a correlation or a trend. We can also do very simple things, like witness groups. We can take one group of salespersons, we can make a pilot group and see if they impact positively sales. And then we can also work on development of skills, because before training, before that, there are, of course, the question of skills, and skill development. And this brings us back to management. It brings us back to the role of the manager in the development of skills and skill development as a whole. So all of this, I think, is perfectly doable, perfectly feasible. And I would invite those listening to think things differently.
On nous dit, ouais, je veux faire une formation, et puis après,
Very often we say, I want to do a training course, but people tend to say, yeah, but what is the impact? And to be perfectly honest, we know that we're going to run into an economic crisis and budgets are going to be tight. So before you do your training course, what indicator am I going to use to measure the course and move forward with that? I fully agree with what Grégory has just said. In a laboratory, training is very, very important. We do it because it's a legal obligation, but we do it with great pleasure, of course, and it's useful. And I think and hope that some of the main suppliers of training that we know will adapt to all of this to give us some new tools, different methods, different methodologies. I hope this, and I wish this, because although we don't measure very much, we have little information really when somebody comes back from when a member of staff comes back from a training course to be able to judge it. Of course, we have our development plans for our staff, and all of this is very important for us. Again, for the learning development process, this is something particularly important in an international company with modules available, with a real desire to really build skills. Skill development is at the heart of what we do. And today, there is no monitoring for the effects of training. So this is based on skills, on really grids with skills, and setting up training linked to this, and then testing whether it works or not. And I agree with Grégory, before we go any further, we have to be sure as to where we are and where we want to go. And what has really pulled us upwards and really made us improve in terms of means of communication and channels is this will to move towards systems which allow us to increase our quality via our staff. Today, there are some very wide-ranging offers, and people like Grégory can help us with this, of course, but all of this has to be based on a tool, and the tool of competence, where we want to go. Thank you very much, Sébastien. Well, yes, for us in schools, we have an accreditation from a European organization called the 3EB, and the indicators are very strict. We have to fulfill them yearly. We have to respond yearly, and we can see through this the evolution of our practices and the evolution of our students. Of course, this is something which we haven't finished yet this year. The school academic year is not over. We had our first set of exams last week, next week too, but it would seem that the results for the initial analysis are as good as in the world pre-crisis. Know that things are not the same, ways of controlling cheating were not the same either, but what we can see is that our students are acquiring skills. And when they come into our veterinary clinics, it's really only at that point that we'll be able to truly assess their skills. In terms of e-learning, the budget is very attractive, but rather high for schools, despite the attractivity of the system. And what would be interested would be bringing together our resources in the different veterinary schools and all the e-learning systems we wish to propose as a continuous, a lifelong learning process for people outside of the school. So the idea is to create a distance learning, e-learning platform with a multiple training offer in order to really use all of the different ideas that we have promoted during the lockdown. So there's some very interesting ideas out there, I can see. I'm now going to hand over to Mathieu to see if there's any questions on these performance measurement tools. Thank you very much, Guylaine. Indeed, there is a question to confirm the previous points on the quality of the presentation.
Sont souvent, même quasiment toujours, les prestations.
First and foremost, quality presentations are presentations where there is interactivity, other people who deplore the fact that the quality of the online courses were not very good quality. And Jean-François says, is there a place for paid online training or not? What about that? How are we going to see that evolving in the future as compared to free of charge? Well, if you are okay with that, I can answer that question. So regarding perception of value, indeed, I think there is a real risk of a drop in the value, the perception, because as Pascal was saying, there's an enormous amount of webinars. We accompanied and supported our customers for this. I remember on Thursday, between 12 and 2, there were 12 webinars for vets, 12 at the same time. And sometimes the formats were too long, not very active, not very exciting. We tried to do things a bit differently because we didn't just want to have a sort of top-down approach. So that's one of the things we need to point out.
And that
means that we have to challenge ourselves, that we have to do things a little bit differently.
Et il y a des choses qui sont faciles à mettre en œuvre.
And there are some very easy things that we can do. Because when we look at the author software today, it's easy to use. Pascal has worked on digital learning and has done it completely autonomously, hasn't necessarily called on an agency for this. Again, I think we need to think about different, short, fun, playful formats. And we need to challenge ourselves as greatly as possible and create this notion of commitment rather than just simply duplicating what we would do in a classroom situation to a digital tool. That's the worst thing we can possibly do. That's not the way to go at all. Anybody want to add something to this? So we're also talking about the difference between paid and free of charge. So this, I think, is something that we need to consider. And it shouldn't be always a free service. We have to pay the people that are there doing the training. So indeed, I think that there is the possibility of proposing paid courses for vets. If it's quality, then why wouldn't it be paid? That's kind of what we're doing at Alfort Veterinary School. There will be an initial tool which will be free for short, sharp training courses to bring people on board, and hoping that they will, of course, enjoy this in order to then buy longer. So that's the way we're working. Small, short training courses, which are free of charge, and then we can just put our credit card number online. And for you, it might seem obvious, but can you imagine setting this up in a veterinary school? I can tell you it was took a lot of time and a lot of energy.
Sur les événements, en tout cas,
so regarding
les congrès,
the events such as congresses and things, we know that there's going to be a certain number of distance congresses in the coming weeks. Is that correct? Yes, indeed. We've anticipated this somewhat. We innovated last year with a virtual congress. So this is the desire to do something different. And this is probably quite well adapted to younger generations. Don't forget the congresses involve a lot of logistics, a great impact.
Réfléchir à des modes de formation différents, sans faire de pub, on a lancé
doing things differently without wanting to advertise what we do. We've launched a platform of short 15-minute modules, which are very good in podcasts. And this is extremely well adapted to the very intense lifestyle that people have. Very often, people don't have time to spend large amounts of time in training. So we're there to provide resources. Also, I want to come back to a word that was said before. There is an overload of training offers. And I think that we're going to also have to stop on all of this and digest this and think about what is really, truly useful. This is something that we're going to be thinking thinking about. There will be another congress on this next year, and other organizations are also thinking about totally virtual congresses too. So all of this is going to generate new uses, but of course won't stop us being there physically either. And really bringing this all together, it's very much a blended process, blended between classroom, distance, e-learning, and it's bringing fun and play as well, and gaming into all of this. And impacting, of course, the new generation of practitioners which is emerging today. It's changing all the time. It's like everything, you know, everything is changing all the time. So we're just thinking about tomorrow, you know, in a changing world, ever-changing world. So just to come back to some points that Debbie was making, it's the same thing with content, you know, MST's idea of capsulette, where people are filmed at home, and the content is very, very relevant. It's short, sharp, punchy, and I'm sure it works super well. It's kind of like virtual reality, augmented reality. We're surfing on all of this, just like everybody else. What is interesting is that the content be really relevant, and that we become more and more skilled. So let's base ourselves on all of this. Let's do things in this way. Let's accompany skill development. And the rest we will think about downstream. But we have to think about the learner, and the learner. The learner is the person guiding all of this. This is why we are doing what we do. Mathieu, do you have any more reactions in the chat? I certainly do. A few questions about transformation of congresses into a digital format, virtual reality as well. So that's their comments, no questions specifically, but comments. Sébastien? Aha, so Sébastien. So we started working on virtual reality for visits in breeding farms, because it seemed important to us that our students be immersed in the real environment, that they be able to make mistakes without it being consequential. When you have a training practice, and if somebody doesn't use the right hygiene solutions, they would be stopped immediately. When we do virtual reality, we can learn as we go and learn from our mistakes. So in the process, we can do everything we want to. We can even blow cows up if we want to, but we have to be able to draw consequences, something which is completely impossible in the real world, in real life. So that's what we have been doing. Students love this because it's quite innovative, quite creative, quite new, and novel. And again, these virtual classes have teaching levels that are very, very high. And when our professors all started doing virtual systems, the participation dropped somewhat. But the AVR can be useful to a certain extent, and is something that we're using more and more for the development of soft skills, the way in which we behave in a specific area, and particularly in breeding farms or abattoirs or whatever. Well, we've learned a lot about this because we've worked a lot with Alfort on this, visiting breeding organizations and breeders themselves. And we, in our context of animal health with our customers, we can't do this in distance learning. We do it in a classroom situation with small groups, with helmets, with glasses, and protective equipment, and very small groups of up to 10 people. So again, it's a question of coaching and facilitation, and we can't imagine that virtual reality will take people into a completely different world with no interaction. We should see virtual reality as a support for the real world. Some very good ideas there. Maybe we can draw our
meeting, our webinar to a close, if you will. I want to thank the four of you for the quality of your presentations. And you all come from very different areas, from a veterinary school, from a veterinary clinic, from a laboratory, from a training specialist, a consulting agency. I think that's what's interesting here, is crossing a crossroads between all of you. There was a question on performance measurement of this webinar, and indeed at the end of the webinar you will receive a questionnaire, a satisfaction questionnaire, which will be sent to you. And I really want to thank all of you, and I will answer a few questions too that will allow me to understand the way in which you have appreciated this webinar, and we will send you an email as well afterwards. So we will indeed take all of that on board. We hope that this debate was interesting for you, rich for you, will help you to manage different situations into the future, and that it will help you to build training strategies for tomorrow. Thank you, all of you. It's a very real pleasure to be here, to hear you. Thank you, all the auditors out there who are very active and very involved. Thank you for your debates. Thank you for your participation. Thank you for your reactions. A final vote of thanks to Claire, our translator, simultaneous translator in English on the English channel, on the parallel English channel. Thank you very much. So if you enjoyed this webinar, and if you have any questions, Matthew's contact details will be given to you. You can keep in touch. He's in the shadows there. I know we can't see him, but please do not hesitate to contact him and us. Thanks to everybody. That's been really great. Thanks, Pascal, David, Guylaine, all of you, Sébastien, all of you. Yeah. We wish you a happy day and look forward to seeing you very, very soon for the next webinar. Goodbye.